Okay, let's dive into this. We often think of education as this one-way street. Teachers stand at the front and teach, and students sit there and learn. But what if that whole model is, well, completely backward? Today, we're digging into a really fascinating study that pretty much challenges everything we assume about young learners and what they're capable of.
So let me just ask you this right off the bat. Do you think a 12-year-old writing about a pretty complex academic topic could convince a university professor, someone with a PhD, that they were actually an adult? I mean, it sounds impossible, right? Well, you're going to want to stick around because the answer is pretty wild.
All right, so the heart of the story comes from a study that was done across Romania, the Republic of Moldova, and Finland. And what it found was this perception gap so huge, you'd honestly think it had to be a mistake.
And get this, it wasn't just a couple of teachers who were fooled. We're talking about a whole bunch of educators, from kindergarten teachers all the way up to university professors with doctorates. They were reading academic papers written by kids as young as 10, and they were totally convinced they were reading the work of an adult. But here's the kicker. This wasn't some kind of accident. It was all part of a very deliberate, very clever experiment.
So you might be asking, why even run an experiment like this? Well, the researchers behind it saw this major growing problem in modern education. There's this massive disconnect between the rigid, old-school way we teach and the super fluid, digital lives that our students are actually living every single day. I mean, think about it. On one hand, you've got the traditional curriculum. It's super structured, everything is led by the teacher, and student input, yeah, that's usually seen as just impractical. But on the other hand, you have the model they used in this study, the Open University model. It's flexible, it's responsive, and it actually invites students to help design the whole thing. One model talks at students, the other one talks with them. Huge difference.
And that brings us to the experiment itself. It all happened inside this virtual open university they called Xredunordiclab. And the big radical idea was this. What happens if we stop treating students like passive sponges for information, and instead we empower them to be co-designers of their own education?
So here's the breakdown. You've got students aged 10 to 16 working with their teachers in these virtual classrooms, and their job was to build their own courses on two really modern subjects, zero coding and digital citizenship. The whole point was to see if giving kids this kind of control would actually improve their academic skills and, maybe just as important, keep them excited and engaged in their own learning.
Now, you might be hearing zero coding and thinking, what on earth is that? Honestly, the best way to think about it is like digital Lego blocks. It's a way for students to build real, working digital things, like apps or websites, using visual tools, drag and drop stuff, instead of having to learn a bunch of complicated programming languages. It's incredibly empowering.
And the other magic ingredient here is something called student agency. This is really the secret sauce of the whole thing. It's this idea, which is grounded in some pretty solid educational theories, that students learn best when they have a real say, real power and choice in their own education, when they feel a sense of ownership. The entire experiment was basically built on this one powerful idea. Okay, so the stage is set, students got the tools, they got the power, and they co-created their own course. They did the work, they wrote their final papers, and then came the moment of truth. The researchers took the students' final written assignments and gave them to that big group of educators we talked about earlier. And they asked them just one simple question. Based only on the words on this page, how old do you think the person who wrote this is?
Okay, just look at this. This is one student, and it's absolutely incredible. This is student 3. Their actual age was 12 years old. But when the educators read their paper, the average age they guessed was 23. Let that sink in for a second. That's a gap of 11 years. A 12-year-old was writing with the sophistication and maturity of a university graduate. It's just, wow.
And that wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just one gifted kid. When you look at the average across all the students in the program, you see the exact same pattern. Their average real age was 13. Their average perceived age was 21. That's an 8-year gap on average. Time and time again, these young learners were performing at a level that experienced professionals thought could only come from someone much, much older.
Now, to really see how big a deal this is, you have to look at the flip side. The researchers also ran a more traditional top-down course for the teachers. And the results? Totally different. Engagement was low, a lot of people dropped out. Even when their bosses pushed them to finish, the motivation just wasn't there. It's such a stark contrast, and it really shows you the incredible power of giving learners, students in this case, a sense of ownership. So the results are pretty undeniable, right? The experiment was a huge success. But the real question is, why? What was the magic formula here? What was it about this approach that unlocked so much potential in these kids?
This quote from the study really nails it. By making the students co-creators, the project tapped into this deep well of knowledge they already had. I mean, these kids are digital natives, right? They've grown up with this technology, and their real-life experience with it often goes way beyond what their teachers even imagine.
So when the researchers broke it all down, they found a few key things that made all the difference. 1. The students got to design content that was actually relevant to their own lives. 2. The tools they used were accessible and made them feel powerful. 3. They had real agency and ownership. And crucially, the whole curriculum connected what they were doing in the classroom to their real digital lives. It also respected their backgrounds by using principles from frameworks like Kaupapa Māori, which is an educational approach from New Zealand's Māori culture that really emphasizes self-determination.
So look, this is way more than just a cool one-off experiment. The results here have some really huge implications for the future of education everywhere. It basically gives us a roadmap for how we can start to bridge that gap between the classroom and the real world.
So what do we do with all this information? Well, the study lays out some really clear practical steps. Actively involve students in creating their own learning content. Use tools that empower them instead of intimidating them. Train teachers to be facilitators, not just lecturers. Weave things like online safety and data privacy into every subject. And make sure the curriculum actually reflects the students' own cultures and the technology they use every day.
And I think this final quote from the research just sums up the whole spirit of this perfectly. This isn't just about tweaking a lesson plan. It's about a fundamental shift, rethinking who holds the power in a classroom and what our students are truly capable of if we just give them the chance to show us. Which really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. This experiment proved that when we trust students to help build their own education, they can blow our wildest expectations out of the water. So what happens if we extend that trust beyond the classroom? If they can build a curriculum, what else could they build for our future?